Appreciate the songs and the reading this morning. We'll see if technology will work here. Appreciate being with you all this morning. It's an intriguing idea that God would make the sun stand still. And if I quizzed you on this, I think a lot of people would, true or false, did God make the sun stand still one day? Oh, yes, true. I think I remember that. But if you're like me, the next question is, why? Do we know why God made the sun stand still? Like, what was so important that God would lengthen the day and make the sun stand still? Such a monumental act, maybe it's trying to signify that there's a deep and profound message about who God is that we need to pay attention to. So this morning I want to look into that, and if nothing else, I at least want you to be able to say, okay, I know what happened the day the sun stood still. Okay, I at least want to get us there. Okay. This event combines a couple things that I really love about Scripture. One is that when you read I don't know if you guys, when you read a story that leaves you just totally scratching your head and trying to figure out what in the world is this about? Like, what just happened here? I usually, when I'm scratching my head about a passage, it's because it doesn't fit into my little paradigm of who God is and the way He should behave. And so I have something that I need to learn about God. And this is one of those stories. And the other thing that this story does, I think, if you'll go along with me and we'll see, is here's the gospel in the Old Testament. I love seeing the gospel played out in a microcosm in these little stories in the Old Testament. So I hope that we get there with this lesson. And I hope I'm not on, I was telling Steve, I told him he needs to tie a rope, and if I get out too far on a limb and I start falling, he just needs to snatch me back. So I welcome your feedback on these ideas. And I'm going to maybe challenge some of the paradigms we have where God doesn't fit neatly into the way that I want Him to behave. I welcome your feedback. Come to me and say, Brad, you got it totally wrong. In fact, if it were up to me, I probably would say, let's do this as a Bible class, and I want to hear what you guys think about this crazy story where God made the sun stand still. But this is not a Bible class, so you got to hear my take, and then you can correct me later. So let's start out with the setting, because this is actually, we were just in Joshua 10. The story starts in Joshua 9. Really, it starts in Genesis, but I won't start in Genesis, I promise. But if you want to follow along in Joshua 9 and 10 is where we're going to be. But Joshua 9 says, when all the kings west of the Jordan heard about these things. So first I got to tell you what these things are. The Exodus, okay? So we got to start out there. About 40 years before, or 40 to 50 years before we're going to jump into our story, God sent plagues, devastating plagues on Egypt, killing the firstborn. They crossed the sea on dry land, and then the Egyptian army is destroyed by the same sea. So those crazy things are the ramifications are echoing throughout the land. And we'll see that. In Joshua, Rahab says, we've heard the stories. We know what you guys are doing, and it's crazy. They wandered in the wilderness, and there's this pillar of fire that's leading them and a pillar of cloud in the day. So, like, some crazy stuff is happening while they're wandering in the wilderness. And then there's the conquest. They get to the Jordan River, and they walk across it on dry land. They walk around Jericho, and the walls fall. And then Ai is destroyed, and all of this. So we're picking up there. And one interesting thing, before we get to that, at the end of Joshua 8, it says, they renew the covenant at Mount Ebal. And he says, Joshua read all the words of the law in verse 34. The blessings and the curses, just as written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. Okay? So men, women, children, and the foreigners are all hearing the blessings and curses, and they hear stuff like this from Exodus 34. Obey what I command you today. I will drive out before you the Amorites, Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Be careful not to make a treaty with those who live in the land where you're going, or they will be a snare to you. And verse 15, be careful not to make a treaty with those in the land. For when they prostitute themselves to their gods and sacrifice to them, they're going to invite you, and you will eat of their sacrifices. So you got to remember, these Canaanite people, the foreigners there, with their religious practices, were extremely violent and vulgar. They were notoriously wicked and evil, sacrificing children to their gods, doing horrendous things that God needs to crush. Okay? And so it's no wonder, Deuteronomy 7:2, he says, make no treaty with them, show them no mercy. Okay? No mercy. That's the instruction. And that was read right before our story starts. So let's get into the treaty that they form. Right? So we're going to, right off the bat, after reading this, they're going to form a treaty. So we're going to pick up in chapter 9. The kings heard about all these things. Okay, so we talked about all these things, the crazy stuff that the Israelites are doing. And they came together to make war against Joshua and Israel. So their reaction is, okay, they're coming. We've heard what they're doing. We're going to have to form an alliance and fight against these Israelites. However, the Gibeonites had another plan. The Gibeonites decide they're going to somehow trick the Israelites into forming a treaty. Now, some of you are remembering, oh yeah, that's this story, right? Oh, the Gibeonites and their worn out clothes and stuff, right? Yep, that's this story. So what they're going to do is, because they know they know they are going to be destroyed. God has commanded for them to be completely and utterly destroyed. They know that, and they have to be really sneaky about forming an alliance. So they cook up this plan, all right? So here's their plan. They're going to put a delegation together, and they're going to load up their donkeys like they're going on a really long journey. But they're going to get worn out sacks and old wineskins, and they're going to have torn that are torn and cracked and have been mended. They're going to put on old worn out sandals and old worn out clothes. Looks like my kids' jeans. Okay. And they're going to get bread that is dried out and moldy. And they walk up to Joshua looking all ragged and crusty. And they go in and they say, whew, I am so worn out from that long journey from a distant, distant land. I am just plumb wore out. We've come from a distant country to make a treaty with you. Now, why would anybody travel a long way to make a treaty? Already, this is a little bit suspicious. Or that's sus, okay? I'm with it, all right? This is sus, and maybe Joshua is a little bit suspicious too, because he says, wait, maybe you actually live near us. So how can we make a treaty with you? The Gibeonites say, we're your servants. kind of changing the subject a little bit. That's not what I asked. I asked who you were and where you came from. They say, we are your servants. And so then Joshua says, okay, who are you and where do you come from? And the Gibeonites again say, where are your servants? You notice that? They say, we're your servants, and we've come from a very distant country. This time they add very, because of the fame of Yahweh your God. And in Joshua 9, verses 9 through 11, they say, we're your servants, make a treaty with us. Now, look at our bread. Why, when we left, this was still warm. It was right out of the oven when we left. But look at it now. It's all dry and moldy. And these wineskins, they were brand new when we started out. And now look, they're cracked and they're dusty too. Man, lies, just straight up lies. And these clothes, they still had the tags on when we left. But now look, they're all worn out from a long journey. And oh man. My favorite verse here is the next one. I think this is verse 9. Verse 14. So after all of these lies and deception, where they're pretending to be from a long way away because they know if the Israelites find out they're from just right around the corner, they won't form a treaty with them. So in verse 14, it says depending on your translation, it says the Israelites took some of the provisions. Well, in the NIV, it says the Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. So I'm just picturing an Israelite taking some of that moldy, crusty bread and taking a big bite of it and like, yep, that's got a wang to it, all right, And sure enough, they don't inquire of the Lord. They fail. So Joshua makes a treaty with them, and they ratify it with an oath, and they say, okay, fine, we believe you, we'll make a treaty, we'll ratify this, an oath to the Lord, and we won't destroy you. Which is just so suspect. 3 days later, though, the Israelites hear that these are Gibeonites who are actually their neighbors. And they go, oh no, we have totally messed up. We've now formed a treaty with the Gibeonites. And the whole assembly is complaining hard to the leadership. They are upset that they've done this. They know they've violated God's word. And the leaders say, okay, but we made an oath to the Lord. We can't touch them now. We've gone and done it. There's nothing we can do now. And so here's what we'll do. We'll let them live so that God's wrath won't be on us. But we'll make them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service to the whole assembly. So, okay, we messed up. Bad news, we broke God's instruction. Good news, you guys don't have to carry water anymore. They're going to do it for you. So a little bit of silver lining. They're trying to find some good out of this. And so they keep their promise and they spare the Gibeonites. Okay, so usually when we get to this point and we're reading, here are the lessons that we point out. Hey, don't forget to inquire of the Lord. You better not forget. The Israelites forgot, and look where it got them. Okay? Always keep your oaths and promises to God. When you make a promise to God, even if it's a rash one, you still need to keep it. Or maybe, don't you lie and deceive. God doesn't want you to do that. But here's the thing. I don't really think that, while all those things are true, I don't think that's what God wants us to read in this lesson. And we haven't even gotten to the sun standing still. What was so important? This seems upside down. This is all people not doing what God said and lying and deceiving. Where's the sun standing still? And maybe these are the things that we teach this class in here. Like, hey, these are all things you should not do. But what about us? What is there, like this is where I'm scratching my head. Like, what's going on? Because, to be honest, the Gibeonites' deception worked. They were spared. And this is what we call mercy, right? So let's move on and let's get to the rest of the story. And here's part 2, okay? So, let me turn the page here. So now that they know these Gibeonites should have been destroyed, they go and confront them. Joshua goes and they confront the Gibeonites in verse 22 and 23 there. Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and he said, "Why did you deceive us by saying we live a long way from you, while actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God." Okay? So they're upset. They have this treaty before the Lord. They've got to do it. And here's the Gibeonites' answer. And this is really fascinating to me. Here's a heathen nation. They've got detestable religious practices. And here's what they say. They answered Joshua, verse 24, "Your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land and to wipe out all its inhabitants from before you. So we feared for our lives because of you, and that is why we did this. And listen, we are now in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you." Wow, does that sound like a prideful, arrogant heathen nation? That sounds like, look, we are powerless against your God. We've got nothing. We can't stand up to you. We've got to be with you because we can't be against you. And you know what? We're in your hands. Do whatever seems right. Okay? So Joshua spared them. And that's called mercy. When you don't get the destruction and wrath that you deserve, we call that mercy, right? Not getting what you do deserve. But there's more, okay? So continue on. Now we're going into chapter 10. Because still we haven't gotten to the sun standing still. What's going to happen that's so important that God made the sun stand still? So, in chapter 10, there's this retaliation for treason, right? All of the kings and all the nations that were there, that were part of the Gibeonites, and that they had an alliance, they all hear that Gibeon has formed an alliance with Israel and submitted to them, and they are upset. So they no longer want to attack Israel. They turn their gaze to Gibeon, and they say, we're going to destroy the Gibeonites for their treason. And it says Gibeon was an important city in verse 2. We learn it was even larger than Ai, and all its men were good fighters. Okay, so if you were thinking that maybe these guys were weak and cowardly, you're wrong. This is a strong, mighty city, a royal city, and all its men were good fighters. Was it flattery? Were they just trying to be nice to the Israelites? Was it faith? Or was it just fear? Like, which one of those is motivating them here? So, Adonizedek, who is the king of Jerusalem, which, by the way, is actually Jebus at this time. It was the home of the Jebusites. But here, this is written retrospectively, so this is going to one day be Jerusalem. He called the other 4 kings, and they decided to attack Gibeon because of that peace treaty that they made with Israel. So they mobilize, they take up position against Gibeon to attack it. And the Gibeonites, when they see this, what are they going to do? They call on the Israelites, right? Wait a minute. In verse 6 of chapter 10, "Do not abandon your servants. Come to us quickly and save us. Help us because the Amorite kings have joined forces against us." Now, when I'm reading this, I think, now, is God going to help Gibeon? Is Israel going to help Gibeon? Their treaty was just not to destroy them. There was nothing in that treaty that I can read saying that they had to also come to their aid if they were attacked. It was just, we're going to spare you, right? That's mercy. So unless I'm missing something, they're not required to come to the aid of the Gibeonites. And you know what? This would be a really good way out of that treaty. Like, let's just let these heathen nations duke it out, destroy each other, and we're golden, right? But that's not what they do. Maybe that would have been God's plan, but no. They march all night long and launch a surprise attack against the Amorites. Okay? And God speaks here. Look at what verse 8, what God tells Joshua. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you." So I don't know if they inquired of God this time or not. Maybe they did. We don't see that here. But God tells them, if they didn't inquire, God speaks. He takes the initiative and he says, go and fight against them. So they have God's sanction to do this. So after an all-night march from Gilgal, this is verse 9, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. So Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road going up to Beth Horon and cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. As they fled before Israel on the road from Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled large hailstones down on them, and more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. Now stop right there. So think about this. These deceitful, lying Gibeonites are under attack, and Israel comes, and God is defeating. God is hurling stones down. And God killed more than the Israelites did. What in the world is happening? This is where I'm scratching my head. Like, why is God so invested in these Gibeonites? What is it? But he doesn't even stop there. Here's where it comes in. On the day, verse 10, on the day the Lord gave the Amorites over to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon." So the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, till the nation avenged itself on its enemies. As it is written in the book of Jashar, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. There has never been a day like this before or since. And I think that's still true today. When the Lord listened to a human being, surely the Lord was fighting for Israel. What in the world is happening here? Why is God using this moment to make the sun stand still? Well, part of this, I think, is, to me, this is the most clear delineation between mercy and grace, right? So mercy is not getting what you do deserve. God spared them with this illegitimate treaty, and then not only did he show them mercy, but he's saving them from their enemies. He's giving them salvation. That's what we call grace, when you get something that you don't deserve. So we've got mercy and grace on full display here, and God is shining his light to say, this is what God does for people that submit to him. What a convincing victory. And, you know, it actually continues on. We won't go there, but they even chased the kings that were allied. They chased them into the caves, pull them out of the caves, and Joshua has the commanders of his army put their foot on the necks of these kings. And this is what God says: don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. Be strong and courageous. This is what the Lord will do to all the enemies you're going to fight. Okay? So, this is where I would love to just stop. And let's just take a minute. I want you guys to look back through, and I'll give you a solid 30 seconds of silence here. Like, what in the world, why would God do this miraculous thing? Think about it. Okay, now that you've had a chance, I don't know if that was 30 seconds or not. It probably was like 10 because it always feels way longer up here when you're standing here. But let me give you a couple ideas that seem to be true to me. And again, please push back on this because this story makes me scratch my head. Because it really seems like God is honoring the lies and deception of the Gibeonites in such a crazy, magnificent way that there's something deeper here that I need to be taking from this story. So I think one of them is this: God's unfailing faithfulness in spite of our failures. Okay? Did you notice that even when everyone else in this story is not doing what they're supposed to be doing, God is still faithful? God's still faithful. The Israelites, they fail to inquire of God, and then they make a treaty which they should not make with this nation. And the Gibeonites, like, they're wicked and they lie and deceive their way into a treaty and into God's favor. Right? And yet God is faithful. God honors something about them. In fact, the Gibeonites are actually, if you think about it, they're just among one of a long list of deceivers that get blessed in the Bible. You ever thought about that? There's a lot more people that are blessed in spite of their deception. Abraham lies, and God saves him from that. He sends a plague on the people that were that had his wife, and God delivers them. God delivers him from that, right? Jacob, whose name means heel grabber, or some people say that means like, obviously he had his brother's heel when he was coming out of the womb, but that's like an idiom for like a tripper upper. Maybe we should call Andrew Jacob. I don't know. But like, here's a guy whose name means he who trips people up. Like, he's a deceiver. He tricks his brother out of his birthright. He deceives his father into giving him the blessing. And so what does God do? God judges him, and he's not part of the nation. No, he becomes the father of the Israelites, this deceiver. Judah visits a prostitute who turns out to be his daughter-in-law, gets her pregnant, and their child Perez still becomes the lineage of the kings. All the kings come from his line. David commits adultery and murder and is called a man after God's own heart. The thing is, the Bible is not full of Cinderella stories where this innocent young girl full of purity finally gets what she deserves. No, that's the Disney version. The Bible version is this mischievous deceivers and sinners that God redeems when they try to trust in him and fail miserably. And you know what? That list that I went through, all those people have something in common. They're in the lineage of Jesus. Every one of them. Abraham, Judah, Perez. I forgot Rahab. I missed it. Rahab lies to the king of Jericho and sends the spies out another way. And that's right before this story, right? So, the Messiah comes through those people. What in the world? Here's the way Paul puts it in Romans 5, 6 through 10. You see, just at the right time when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous person, though for a good person someone might dare to die. But God demonstrates His own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. We've been justified by His blood. How much more will be saved from God's wrath through Him? Does that sound like the Gibeonites? Sinners, but saved through grace? For if while we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to Him through the death of His Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through His life? Mercy and grace in one fell swoop. That's why I'm just like, wow, here's the gospel in Joshua to a heathen nation. And yet, it was a mystery if God was going to accept the Gentiles. Like that was the mystery. And I don't know, like, I feel like I'm not going to develop this point too much because I think that's a little too far out on the limb. So, but why would God do this magnificent thing for these people who were doing things wrong? Like they were tripping up over trying to do things. And I don't know about you, but I feel this way sometimes. I try so hard to do what's right that I end up doing the wrong thing, right? Like Micah's like, Brad, I just want you to make the decision here. I'm like, okay, I'm going to try really hard to make a good decision, and I still mess it up. The other day I was mowing, a couple weeks ago actually, I was mowing my yard, and I get up to this one limb that I always mow under. I get all the way up. I put the limb is like up against my knee on the mower, and I actually had the thought, man, wouldn't it be dumb if I went the wrong direction and crushed my leg? And then you know what I did? Full speed ahead, and I crushed my leg. And I was like, I just thought, don't do that, and I did that. What in the world? And I just feel like here you get a little peace, you get a little freedom. Like God says, wait, let me shine the light on someone who they messed up in trying to find my mercy and grace. And I knew their heart, like Sam said. I knew their heart. They were afraid for their life. They knew they were destined for destruction. And I'm going to honor that. And not just honor it in an instance, but eternal. This is an example of God's eternal grace. And here, I've struggled where to put this, because actually we didn't get to the end of the story there either. This is not the last time we hear from the Gibeonites. First of all, in Joshua 17, it's interesting. Let's see. Where does it say that? I didn't put this in my notes. I just remembered it. Oh man, I thought it was 17. Anyway, I'll find it in a minute. But Joshua 17 and 18 maybe is like a recap. And it says somewhere that out of all the nations in the land, the Gibeonites were the only ones who formed a treaty of peace with Israel. If somebody finds that, please just shout it out. It's somewhere here at the end. Maybe it's chapter 14. So I'll find it. But so it points out that Joshua points out these were the only ones, and it sounds flattering to me. But turn over to let's see. Nope, I don't want to go there yet. Turn over to 2 Samuel 21, just real quick. I promise this is worth it. I know I've gone pretty long here. 2 Samuel 21. So when I looked this up on the timeline, the Gibeonite treaty would have been around 1400 BC. 2 Samuel 21 would have been around 970 BC. So this is 430 years later. Okay? 430 years after the treaty with the Gibeonites, during the reign of David, I'm in verse 1 of 2 Samuel 21, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. Hey, he inquired of the Lord. The Lord said, it's on account of Saul and his blood-stained house, because he put the Gibeonites to death. 430 years later, Saul puts some Gibeonites to death, and God sends a famine. Like, God still remembers the faith of the Gibeonites. Like, this spotlight is there for a reason. God's salvation is eternal. And then one more, Nehemiah chapter 3. You don't have to turn there, but Nehemiah 3 is one of those boring chapters of the lists of names. And it's all the people who are there working on the wall. They've all returned from captivity. They're working on the wall, and it says next to this guy was this guy, next to him was this guy, next to him was this guy. Nehemiah 3, verse 7, next to them, repairs were made by Melatiah the Gibeonite, Jadon the Maranathite, and the men of Gibeon and Mizpah. This would be around 440 BC, almost 1,000 years after this crazy treaty with the Gibeonites. They're there rebuilding the wall right next to the rest of Israel. What in the world? The faith and of the faithfulness of the Gibeonites and of God to remember his covenant and bring them back from captivity with everybody else. Ridiculous. He never forgets about the Gibeonites. Even after 1,000 years, he's still including them with his people. Okay, last thing. We're all Gibeonites. Okay? We were talking about this, I think, as a family, we were talking, and one of the kids was like, you know what? I just realized I'm not a Jew. I have always read the Bible, and I've been like, oh yeah, I can relate to the Jews. But no. I don't know, is anybody in here of a Jewish lineage? We're all Gentiles. We're all Gibeonites. We are all destined for destruction because we're not God's chosen people unless God reveals himself to us, right? So, look at this. This maybe this summary. Think about it this way. The Gibeonites recognized they were marked for destruction. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. We're right there with the Gibeonites. They feared God. And that's the beginning of their wisdom. They did whatever it took to find favor with God. Yep, and that included lies and deception to get there. And God honored it. God saw through that. We just read in Acts, he put up with that, their ignorance. He winked at it. He overlooked it. He disregarded this ignorance, and he honored their faith because they humbled themselves. They said, you want us to be your servants? All right, sure. And you know what? God takes servants and makes them his sons. They become the servants, they humble themselves, and they receive God's mercy and grace. So I don't know. I feel like if I'm asking, why did God make the sun stand still? It's because he wants us to see that even you can come to God. Even the Gibeonites, those deceitful liars, can humble themselves enough to where God reaches down and his grace reaches even me, even Cole. It reaches us, right? It reaches even me. It reached the Gibeonites, and it can reach each one of us. So, why the sun stand still? I don't know. Maybe those are some possibilities. But I hope you reflect on that. I want to hear your thoughts and your corrections on that. But let's finish our service and praise God that He loves us so much that He would overlook our ignorance and sin and actually provide the remedy Himself and give us mercy and grace. At any point in time, when you realize your status before God and your need for Him, please don't hesitate to drop everything you do. Do whatever you have to do, whatever it takes, to find God's favor. So let's stand.